Hello. Okay, now we have sound. Sorry, I'm going to explain this. Me and João Soares, we were trying to record sound from our computer, so we had a little technical problem with the input and output of audio. So, starting over. Hello all, my name is Gonçalo Palma, I'm from Flutter Portugal, and here we are with the live sessions of Flutter Portugal. We had a live workshop, I think it was in March, and we decided to take the concept one step further by creating two live sessions. The first one, it will be today, and it will be composed of two talks, one about creating complex UIs and the other about animations, and next week we'll have another two talks, first about asynchronous operations, and then we are going to explore how we can use Firebase in our Flutter applications. So let's start with the first talk, from design to Flutter, from a Flutter challenge. But first, who am I? My name is Gonçalo Palma. I come from Portugal, but currently I reside in the UAE. I'm a Flutter developer at FreeRain. I have 2 years of experience with Flutter. I'm a technical writer for Flutter, and in my spare time I do like to do some open source projects. So, the question is, why should we care about creating UI in Flutter? We should care about creating UI in Flutter because when we start creating apps, we usually tend to use the material guidelines. So, for example, the Flutter Counter app, in which we use a app bar, a floating action button, and then we provide some text to our apps. But then we decide to expand on our product, or maybe we are inside a team that has a dedicated designer, and we have to go from this to a full design with some specific and custom widgets. This is a design created by Yulia Shagoferova, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, and as you can see, it is not either material or Cupertino. It has custom UI elements. Now, what is the trick about creating complex UI elements in Flutter? In my opinion, it's one. Practice, practice, and practice. But I'm no designer. And maybe I'm not working in a team that has a good designer, or even that has a designer. So how can we go about it? We can go to websites like dribble.com, in which we have a plethora of designs in which we can inspire to create some complex UIs. And for me, this was the first step into animations, into the stack widget, and into very other specific stuff in Flutter, specific UI stuff in Flutter that I was not aware with in my current job. So in this talk, we are going to have a challenge. We want to create a food recipe app, and we are going to be inspired by this design by Marta Glukova. This design is going to have 3 screens, an introduction screen where we have a start now that can be seen as a login. Then we will have a main screen in which we have a list of recipes and a search bar so that we can search for them. And finally, we are going to have a detail screen in which we have the name and some details about the recipe. Now, what are the steps to create a Flutter UI? The first thing that we have to see when we are creating a Flutter UI is that we don't want to create something that in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months from now, we don't know what we are building. Or, even worse, that we have to modify UI elements separately in our app so that we can change things. Imagine, for example, in this UI, in 2 months we don't like the color yellow, and we want to change every color in our app from yellow to red. We are going to have to follow specific steps in which to create concise and robust apps so that we can change everything that we want. And the steps, in my opinion, are: first, create themes for colors and textiles. Second, we are going to decide what are the layout widgets that we are going to use in our app. For example, rows, columns, stacks, list views, etc. We are going to look at our UI and see what are the widgets and what are the UI elements that are repeated throughout the screen so that we can reuse them by creating isolated widgets. Then, I'm sorry, I was just looking at the chat. Hello Tom, I don't know what sicko mode is. Can you explain what that is? Moving on. Fourth point, adapting UI to different sizes. Sometimes we are deploying every time to the same device, for example, if we are testing in an emulator or if we are testing in our device. And if that's the case, when we deploy to different devices, we see that design may not look well in every different device. And finally, we must decide if we are going to create platform-aware widgets. We know that Material Design and Cupertino have different design standards. For example, we have different alert dialogues, and we have to decide if we are going to create custom widgets to display in different devices. So, let's start by the first step, creating themes. When we start creating our apps, specifically the text, we may start by doing the following. We declare our text widget, we say what is the string that we are going to have, and then we declare the style directly. In this case, you are going to have the color, the font size, and the font weight. We can take a step further if we want to reuse this text style in other widgets by declaring a new class called styles, in which we are going to have constant static text styles that we can reuse throughout our code. And in this case, you see that we have a text widget, and we can usually reference the style by saying styles body style. The same is going to be applied to colors. So either we can use the colors class to have all the material colors such as gray, green, blue, etc. Or we can declare the colors directly by using the hexadecimal values. Furthermore, we can also create a single class called colors, in which we declare the static constants for the background colors, text colors, etc. However, this has a problem. So imagine we are declaring that our text is going to have a color of gray. What if tomorrow we want to change our color from gray to blue? Do we have to change the variables? Do we have to change the whole text style? Is there a solution to this? And there is. The solution is to use themes. And in fact, when we create our example project, the counter app, we are using themes by default. So, in our material counter app in the Flutter create command, we see that in the my app, we have in the build method a material app. And this material app is going to have a theme in which it holds the colors, the primary swatch of colors blue. This is basically saying to Flutter, apply to every element that you can an array of colors of blue. So let's explore the theme data documentation. In the official documentation, it is stated that the theme data class will hold the color and typography values for a material design theme. And we can either use it isolated in the theme widget or with the theme or with the material app. If we use a theme widget standalone, we see that we can declare the theme, said it will hold the theme data. In this case, we are saying that the primary color is going to be amber, and then we can retrieve the value by using theme.ofContext primary color. If you are familiar with Flutter, you see that it's very similar to what we have with Navigator widgets. If we want to navigate to a new screen, we use navigator.off, and this is because both Navigator and Theme are both widgets that are inside our widget tree. Now, moving on. We have to look at our app and see what can we do to what can we apply in our theme. So what colors can we use, what text style can we use, and if we look closely at it, we see that, for example, the background color is not the same in all screens, nor is the text theme, the text styles. I'm sorry, not this. So if you look again at the documentation, we see that we can change some specific values. First, we see that at the top, in the example, we have the primary color. This is going to be applied, for example, for the app bar, and the accent color is going to be applied, for example, at the floating action button. If we want to change the text style for the body, we can do it by using the text theme of body1. You can see that, for example, in our material app, we declare the primary color, we then declare the text theme that we want, and if we declare the text theme for the body, we have a very peculiar thing. We then don't have to reference what the text style we are going to use if we are in the context of the body. Now, there are multiple properties that we can change. For example, the button color, the divider color, the font family, etc. In fact, if you look at the documentation, you can see the array of things that we can change in the theme data. So, and now, looking at our app, we see that first things first, there are different background colors for our app, and there are also different text styles. But one cool thing that we can do with the text styles is that we can use the copy with method that is basically going to say, okay, use this text style, but copies everything with a different font weight or a different color. This lets us reuse mostly what we have defined in the material app without having to define a whole new text style just for that widget. Now, in terms of colors, we can define a primary color for the icons and stars, and we can define a button color for our app. Again, as I said earlier, we are going to have here a white background color, black background color, and here we have an image. So it doesn't make sense for us to provide a scaffold background color or background color to our app, since it's going to change throughout the app. If we want to reduce work, we can say that, okay, we are going to define a white background color for our app, and also we are going to say that the app bar is going to have a white background. This means that when we are declaring this widget, we don't have to worry about it. Then, we have different text styles in our app. We have the text styles that we use in the header widgets. Then we have the special recommendation sections that is going to look quite similar, but it has a different font size. And finally, we have a body 1 and body 2 text styles. The names headline 1, headline 2, body 1 and body 2, they change from a previous version of Flutter, so the best thing that we can do, as always, is to go to the documentation of text styles or entering the either in the website or entering the code ourselves and see what are the properties that we can use in our apps and what are they going to be applied in. As we saw in the previous slides, for example, if we define the body 1 property, it's going to change the text for the whole text widgets in our body. As we can see here, in the case of our app, we can define the colors. We can define the theme for the app bar. In this case, we are just going to say that the background color is going to be white. And then we have to specify a text theme in which we are going to state each text style that we are going to use. This will make it easier for in the future if we want to change our background color from white to red, or if we want to change our button colors from yellow to blue. We don't have to change the name of the variable in the static class, or we don't have to look inside our code and see what are the instances of the color variables. We just have to go to our material app or to our theme widget and directly change it. This makes it easier for us in the future, as I said earlier, to know where things are in the app. We condensate everything in our theme data. With the theme concluded, we go to the next step, which is to choose layout widgets. And the first thing that we have to know about layout widgets is that there are two types of layout widgets. The first one are single child layout widgets. These widgets are used to change the position of the child in the screen, for example, in align, a position or center, to specify the specific dimensions or constraints to our widgets with the size box, container or constraint box, or even to transform our widget by skewing it, rotating, translating, etc. with a matrix 4. Then we have multiple child widgets. The most common are the row and the column, in which we can display our items horizontally or vertically. Then we can also display a scrollable list or a grid of items with a list view or grid view, and we can place items on top of each other with the stack widget. If if we want to display multiple items in a row or a column, we can use the wrap widget. This widget makes it so that when we are outing children, if our child goes further align that the boundaries of this widget, it will create a new line and it will place that widget there. Now, let's see how the column, row, and stack widgets behave. If we declare a new page in which we only have a column widget and we declare, for example, 3 containers with different colors, the containers are going to be aligned at the center in terms of the horizontal axis, and they are going to be aligned at the top in terms of the main axis of the column. We can align everything in the horizontal axis, for example, at the start, at the end, or at the center with the cross-axis alignment property, and we can make even further customization to our UI by, for example, saying that we want to stretch our widgets as much as we can by using the cross-axis alignment stretch property. If we look now, for example, at the main axis alignment, we can align our widgets at the top, at the start, as we had in the previous case, at the end, at the center, or, for example, to say that I want space around our widgets. So I want space before the first widget, after the last widget, and in between widgets. If, for example, we just want one space between our widgets, we can use the space between property. Also, we can, for example, say, okay, I want my first widget to be as large as it can while the other widgets maintain their height. We can do this easily by wrapping our container widget with an expanded widget. This works in both rows and columns because they accept flex widgets. In flex widgets, we can both expand our widgets, we can expand 1, 2, or 3, and also say what is the flex property. Or say, for example, if we wrap 2 widgets with the same expanded widget, we can say that we want one to be larger than the other. If we want to, instead of expanding a widget, to expand white space, we can easily do it by using the spacer widget. We have other properties for the rows and columns, such as, for example, defining the axis size, saying that we want the row and column to be as minimum as possible or as large as possible. Moving on from the rows and columns, we go to the stack. We can define a stack the same way that we define a column and a row. So we define the widget and then we give it an array of children. In this case, when we define a stack, it will be aligned at the top left corner. We can then put some properties on the stack widget itself, such as, for example, the alignment, in which we can say that we want all our widgets to align at the center, or like we had in the row and the column with the stretch property, we want our child to expand as large as possible with the stack fit expand. Furthermore, we can use the single child widget to position our children on the screen. The most common one is the center widget. It will simply center our child in the screen. We can move on with the positional widget. This widget will say that I want to position my child on the screen, and my child will be 20 pixels left from the right, 100 pixels on top of the bottom, and we could also say, for example, that we also want it to be 20 pixels to the right of the left. And this will make our widget to expand from the left to the right. Moving on, if we want to easily align our widgets, we can do so using the align widget with the alignment property. This alignment property will easily let us align them to the bottom center, to each of the corners, obviously, and also to the center. Then let's look at our UI and see what are the layout widgets that we can define for our challenge. In the case of the first screen, we have two options. Either we can use the stack widget, since we will have widgets on top of each other, since we have an image, then we have a text widget and a button. Or if we don't want to use a stack widget, we can go by another route. We can say that our root widget, it's going to be a container with a box decoration that will have an image. Then the child will be a column that will display all the items. For this talk, and since in the desk talk we are going to speak about animations, we are going to use the stack. As we saw previously, we can use the position widget to quickly position the headline text in a specific X and Y position, and we can use the align widget to align our button to the bottom center of the screen. If we look at this button, we can also see that it has some white space around it. And this white space around it can be provided with the padding widget. With the padding widget, we can say that on the left, right, bottom, and top, we want to have X amount of white space around it. Now, before moving on, if you do have, for example, an iPhone X or further, you know that you have a space home bar at the bottom. And that UI element, you don't want it to be on top of the button. So Flutter provides you with the safe area widget that automatically adds padding so that our widgets are not on top of native UI elements or hardware elements, such as, for example, the notch. We can see here that in our intro page, we define a stack. We see that it's expanded so that our button can expand to the edges of the screen. And then we define an image to be at the lowest level of the stack. We define our header widget with the position, and then we use an align with a padding and safe area for our button. We move on to the home page, and in a home page, the first widget that we'll have is a scaffold. The scaffold widget allows us to have an up bar and a body for our widgets. Basically, it is a convenient widget that positions certain widgets on the screen, such as, for example, the up bar, the bottom bar, the floating action button, and the body. In this case, the body is going to be composed of a list of scrollable items, so we can use a list view. Moving on, we have this search bar, and we want to make it a little bit different. So instead of doing this design, we are going to adapt it to this one. So we have the search bar, and then below the search bar, we are going to have all the search terms that we typed. As we see here, each time that we type a search term, we are going to check if the search term can stick to that line or not. If it cannot, it moves to the next line. Instead of doing this logic ourselves, we can use the wrap widget that does this computation for us. We then see that we have a custom grid of items that we can easily do with the combination of columns and rows. We see here that we define a column. It will basically have two lines. The first will have a row with another column that is going to be these two items, and then the food image that is going to be this item. And the second line, it's just going to be a row with the three items. Finally, we have our list of recommendations at the bottom, which is going to be also list view. This list view is going to have just one specific property, which is the scroll direction. By default, a list view is going to have a vertical axis scroll direction, and this one we are going to have to change it to horizontal. Finally, we have our final screen, the detail screen. It's going to be very similar to both the previous screens. So at the root, we are going to have a scaffold widget, and as the body, we are going to have a stack and a combination of rows and columns to display the items. So for example, here in the stack, we position an image on the top of the background, and we can align this at the bottom that is going to be a row of items that are inside a column. And here we have the code. If we go through it quickly, we see that at the root we have a scaffold, we have an up bar, and then we have our stack with a column and an align at the bottom. Reusable widgets. Why do we need to use reusable widgets? if we look at our app, we see that there are some widgets that are replicated throughout the app. For example, the recipe widget. And imagine that today we are fine by it having round corners, but tomorrow our designers say, look, I don't like this, you will have to make a circular widget. If we didn't make an isolated widget just for this situation, we will have to change in each page, each widget, all the properties. By making reusable widgets, we are making less code, and we are making it easier for in the future for us to change everything that we want. So we can look at our UI and see that there are many screens that are repeated throughout the 3 screens. The first thing that is repeated is the buttons. We use it in the first screen and in the last screen. Then the image widgets are going to be repeated. We are going to have a list of items that are composed of images, and in a detail screen we show a large image with the recipe image. The header text widgets are also replicated, the user icons, and finally the recipe items that hold the recipe details. So what's the secret about creating reusable widgets? It's basically seeing what changes. And what changes in each widget. In the first widget, the text widget, we see that the text will change from widget to widget. Here it's welcome to cookbook, and here it's good evening. The text color is going to be different, and also the text size. A parenthesis here. We could either create a widget only, for example, for the header. So we could say that this was an isolated widget, and then we create another isolated widget with a small font size just for the special recommendations. This way, for example, if we just wanted to change the header text, we'll change just the header text without impacting our special recommendation text. So in this case, we either make the text size reusable or not. It depends on the situation and on our designer and really what we want. There's no right answer in this. Then we have the images that will of course have a different image, but also have a different on-tap callback. If we are on the home page, we want to click on it and for it to navigate to the detail page. But if we are in the detail page, we don't want for it to click and to go to a specific place. The buttons will have something similar, so we'll change the text and also the on-tap callback. If we are on the login screen, we want to go to the detail page, but if we are on the recipe page, maybe we want to show some other information to the user. And finally, for the recipe items, we are going to have a different icon and we are going to have a different text. If we are used to create widgets in Flutter, we know that we can provide arguments to it. So for example, for the header widget, and I'm sorry for going through the slides quickly, for the header widget, we can say that it will have 3 properties: the title, the subtitle, and the color. This widget will be the widget that is going to be used in all the screens. And if we look carefully at it, we also check that in the styles, we are using the copy with method to say that I want to access the specific headline 1 style, but I want to change both the font weight and the color. Now, when we are creating a custom widget so that it can be reused, there are 2 other things that we may want to provide. First, a builder function so that we can create new widgets. For example, if we are using a list view builder, we provided a list of items, and then that widget provides us a function that we can create each child widget. So for example, for the first item, we show an image corresponding to the first item with a specified callback. For the second image, the second item, the second image, and so on. Or we may want to provide a specific callback to the button. Each time that we click on a button or on an image, we want to reference both the image and the context so that we can display the correct detailed screen. We can easily do it by using the type def, in which we declare a name for our function, we declare all the parameters that we are going to use, and we declare the return time. And we are going to use this as we use any other parameter in our widgets, such as strings and integers. And for example, for the recipe image, we see that we provide as a parameter the recipe image callback. And when we are on the gesture detector, we on the on tab, we just call it like it's a normal function. Now we have reusable widgets. Tomorrow, if in this case, for example, the recipe image, we want to change something, we can easily change it. For example, we can change the border radius, we can add some background to it, and these changes will be replicated in every place of the app. Moving on to the next topic, responsive layout. And I have to be honest, this is a topic that's very near to me, because the first time that I was developing professional apps for Flutter, I developed the apps by every time compiling to my OnePlus 6 device. And a week before releasing our app, we decided, okay, let's see how the app looks and feels in our devices. So we decided to output the same app into an iPhone SE. And we saw that the design looked horrendous. So basically, the UI that I created was not scaling properly to different devices, both larger than the OnePlus 6 and smaller than the OnePlus 6. And this is something that we need to tend when we are creating applications. Let's look at an example. In this case, we are creating a container with a fixed width and a fixed height. And though this might look good in, for example, an iPhone SE, if we deploy it on an iPhone Pro or an iPhone XI Pro, or for example, an iPad Pro, it might look kind of odd. And now you say to me, okay, that is good. I want to check how it handles in different devices, but I really don't want to create 20 simulators and checking in every situation how it handles. And I'm going to give you a tip that I learned from Roddy Davis. If you are doing UI and you are using a MacBook, you can easily build to macOS, and you have a window that you can easily resize and check how our UI is going to look in different situations. So in this case, we see that our square, though it might look nice in the initial situation, when we expand further our screen, that box is not adapting. And that might either be good, because we want that item to have that specific dimension, or we want our item to enlarge or be smaller when we change our device resolution or the type of device that we are using. And there are two ways that we can handle this, and it's not a matter of either choose one or choose another. We can solve this by using the media query widget. The media query widget is going to give us some properties about the device, like for example the screen size. So when we are building UIs, we can build it correspondent to the screen size that we currently have. And we can use the layout builder widget, which is basically going to provide us information about our parent, including, for example, what are the constraints that our parent gives us, what is the max width and the max height that it has, or the max or the minimum width and the minimum height that our widgets can have. And it's not, as I said, a matter of choosing one solution or the other. It's a matter of knowing what we should apply in each situation. Let's first look at the media query widget. The media query widget is going to give us a set of configurations for the current device. It has the screen orientation, the screen size, the device's text scale factor, which we can change. I think it's the accessibility feature of Android and iOS, and whether the user has disabled or not the animations, etc. We can easily access the widget like we do a navigator or the theme by using media query of context and accessing the property. In this case, we are accessing the size property, and then we can create a container, and that container will scale corresponding to the size of the screen. So, as you might imagine, we deploy it to macOS, and we can scale our app as much as we can, and the widget will also scale accordingly to the screen size. But what if we don't want our widget to scale according to the screen size, but we want to have an inner widget that will scale with the parent? That's why we use the layout builder. The layout builder will give us a set of constraints from the parent. For example, as I stated earlier, the max width and the max height. Then we can make some decisions about what we are going to build. For example, if our screen is larger than 720 in terms of width, I think that this was the older dimensions for tablets in Android. If it's larger than that, we can assume that we are in a tablet, then we can display 2 columns. If it's smaller than that, we can display 1 column. And though this may look a lot of code, like a lot of codes, we see that we declare a layout builder. It has a builder method in which we can access the constraints and say, okay, is it smaller than 720? If so, just give me a container, else give me a row that will have 2 containers. And here in the next widget, you can see that we start scaling the resolution, and though the screen width is larger than 720, the widget isn't. Only when the widget is larger than 700, the child width, this white widget, is when we are going to display 2 columns instead of 1. And so with this, we could go back to our app and, for example, using the MIDI query of context, we could easily position our headliner text on the screen. Or we could also say that in our specific rows and columns, in the grid that we created, we can calculate what is the width and height of each item or something more. The final topic that we are going to touch is the platform-aware widgets. Why is it so important? Android and iOS adhere to different design standards. With Android, we have material design, and with iOS, we have Cupertino. And this will make it so that not only our UI, but the user is going to expect different behavior, both on user experience and user interface for specific items. For example, alert dialogues. In Android, an alert dialog text is going to be it's going to be aligned on the left, as we can see here, and there is no division between the button and the body of the alert dialog. Whereas if we are in iOS, we can see that all the text is going to be centered, and we have a dividing line between the body and the buttons and between each button. If we go to buttons, we can see that the Android, they don't have much vertical padding, and that we have rounded corners, but it's not too much rounded. And on iOS, we have much more padding and the corners are more round. Furthermore, I didn't display here a GIF, I'm sorry, but we can also say that in the case of buttons, when we click on them, we are going to have different behavior. If we click on an Android button, we expect a ripple, but if I'm not wrong, if we click on an iOS button, we expect for the transparency to be different. The top bar in Android, the text is going to be centered on the left, and here we have all our actions in icons, whereas in iOS, we usually have our text centered and our actions are going to be displayed in text. Then on the bottom bar, they look quite similar, but from these designs that I saw, I don't know if this adheres to the current Cupertino guidelines, but I think that in some cases in iOS, the bottom bar can be translucent, so we can see part of the background here, whereas in Android that doesn't happen, and we also have here a shadow between the bottom bar and the body. Finally, only in case of examples, the switches look and feel different. And we have more examples just as we have here. And again, we look at our design, and if we look at our design, there's not many things that will look and feel different. But one thing that we have is, going back, different buttons. So we have the sign in button and we have the recipe detail button that we can customize for Android and for iOS. The question is, how can we do that? We can do that easily by accessing the platform class. The platform class is going to provide us different information, like for example, what operating system are we on, with variables such as is a boolean value, such as is Android and is iOS. Then, in our app, we can create a reusable widget in which we can cycle with an if the type of widget that we are going to show. In this case, we say that if our platform is Android, we are going to show a raise button which adheres to the material guidelines. Else, we are going to show a Cupertino button, which means that we are an iOS device. And as you can see here, though we are outputting different widgets for different platforms, the parameters are going to be the same. So we have the same callback and the same texts. And we don't need to only specify this for widgets. We have different dialogues, we have different buttons, but we can even go a step further and have a different user experience by using different navigator animations. As we know, in iOS, I think it goes from right to left when we are switching pages, whereas in Material sometimes we have a fade animation or it goes from top to bottom. I may be wrong. But we can tailor specific things for specific devices by accessing the platform channel and creating custom widgets for it. If we don't want to create custom widgets every time for every project, we can even use packages such as platform aware widgets. I think it's on PubDev that we declare our widget twice, and internally it will make the platform check for us. And now we have our UI created, we made it robust and reusable. So what are the next steps? For the next steps, we can say that we can add animations to our project, both with the animation suite and Rive, or we can even go a step further and use the custom paint property to paint stuff directly on the screen. And that's it. We have gone through the steps to create a complex UI. We have seen how how layout widgets work, how to create platform widgets, and if you want to know more, you have here the link for the repo. We are going to share the slides afterwards. And for those of you who want to make questions about the talk, you can easily go to our Discord server at chat.flutter.portugal or ask directly on the YouTube chat. And now I'm going to start the Q&A session with João Soares. He's going to read the questions that we have from our users. Are you there, João?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, we can hear you and it's working on OBS. Perfect. So, do we have questions from our users?
No specific questions yet. Let's see. I think we've got some people writing on the events channel right now.
First, thank you so much for each and one of you that is listening to the talk. I see that we have a question, maybe from Khaled.
We do have a question, yes.
Yeah, Khaled Ahmed. Thank you for watching the talk, by the way, Khaled. If we want to reuse some elements like animation controller or skull controller, what is the best way to make it reusable, as they require some things that are tied to widget lifecycle in the init state? I think that question is going to be addressed in João in the next session. But imagine that, for example, let me put here the UI, and I think that I'm going to say more or less what João is doing. Imagine that you have this button, and you want this button to enlarge and to be smaller. You can make a stateful widget in which inside that stateful widget you declare the animation controller, and you declare everything that is going to control the animation just for that widget. In that way, the parent is not going to know anything about the animation, and it's going to be the widget that is going to control it. Am I saying it right, João? You can also intervene in this one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, okay, we got some other questions. When it comes to the animation controllers, if I understood the question here, I'm not sure what you mean by keeping things tight on the widget lifecycle, but essentially, if you're going to use, if you want to use multiple animations that you want them to all work together, then yes, you'll just use probably one animation controller with a single ticker mix in on your stateful widget. If you are actually going to have multiple animations that work independently, then you'll have to use a normal ticker, and you can just with that stick to using multiple animation controls. I'll do some examples of that on our next session during my workshop on the animations, really.
Awesome. I see that Romeo Beato asks if we are going to make a presentation about state management. That is in the works, so we are going to have two sessions. One today, that we are going to have the animation talk with João Soares. Next week, again, we are going to have the asynchronous talk and the Firebase talks. After that, we are going to expand to more themes, such as, for example, state management. Okay. If we don't have any more questions, do you want to ask something specifically, João?
For you, I don't have any specific questions right now.
Oh,
to be
come on,
honest.
come on.
No, I don't. But we have questions on from Code Glitch on Discord. So he's asking
Hi,
if
Koglitch.
if you find the performance difference between using Layout Builder or Media Query, or is it the same?
Well, I didn't test the performance on them directly, though you can think of it this way. When we are using Media Query, we are relying on the build method of the whole widget. So you are accessing the variable once when the widget is creating, and if there is not another build method, we are not going to change anything. On the other hand, if we are using a layout builder and something in our layout changes, our widget is going to be rebuilt. And this is not a matter of is the performance is going to be better or not. Imagine that you have two widgets. The screen size is going to be the same, but if this one enlarge, this is going to be smaller. And if this one, if it has a layout builder, you want this widget to be rebuilt with a new configuration. If you were listening to the media query, you were just listening. You would just listen for the screen size, so you wouldn't rebuild the widget with the correct configuration. I will have to test it, and I will have to get back to you about the specific topic of performance. I hope that
He does have a
go ahead.
question after that. Is about he says he's terrible with design, and if you have any other resources that you can share besides Dribble to get ideas from.
So I think I'm not sharing my screen. So there is Dribble, there is Behance, and I think that there is one new called Ello. ELLO. Yeah, the Creators Network. Also, there are. I just want to name them correctly. There are a bunch of YouTubers. I don't know if you do design challenges, João, or not, but there are
design challenges. No,
yeah,
not usually.
There is a YouTuber called Cybdon, Cybdon, that typically does design challenges, and also I think that Roddy Davis actually did some of them. So you can inspire either on their talks, or you can search in Google, Behance, Ello, Dribble, and also look for what you like. For example, you are going to make an Uber clone. The first obvious thing is to download Uber-like applications. So you can download Uber. If you are in the UAE, you can download Karim. If you are in Portugal, you can download MyTaxi, and you can see the differences in layouts and get inspired by it. So it's just not a matter of let's go to what design is creating these websites, but it's also a matter of, okay, what do I want to build? What are the existing apps on the market, and how did they do it? Let me see. I will also open Discord.
We don't have any further questions right now.
Okay, so on my part, thank you all for listening to the stream. We are going to have a quick break, and after the break we are going to have the presentation by João Soares about animations. Stay there.
Certo.
Não está a funcionar. Não está a funcionar o som.
What about now? Can you see? Yeah, it should be working now.
Vai,
Okay.
siga.
Okay, so sound should be working now. Sorry about that. It seems to be a recurring theme here. So I'm going to start with the much smaller presentation. So intro to animations on Flutter. We'll be going through a few animations that you can do with relatively simple animations. I'm just gonna give a really quick definition here of what implicit and explicit animations are, which is something that Flutter on the Flutter channel they've discussed and shown some differences. So you can find that on documentation. But I just want to explain a little bit that implicit animations are essentially animations that you just define a widget and you have a property that's going to change. So I have examples here of an animated container, animated size, where in an animated container, you can just say that at a given point in time, the width of it or the height has changed, and Flutter will do the animation for you. You're not specifically controlling it with an animation controller or defining anything specific apart from the properties of the widget that you want changed. On an explicit animation, it's the opposite. You actually do define it an animation controller of sorts. You have to define the duration you want the animation to go through. You say when it goes forward, goes reversed. You can reset it, so you have a bit more control. They're a bit more complex to apply, but also you have a lot more control than just the basic ones. So what we're going to do, we're going to learn some stuff today, and these are mostly the widgets and animations that we're going to be going through. From here animations, which are quite simple animations to introduce, where Flutter literally takes care of everything. You just say, which widget is going to get animated, where it's going to land. We'll go through it in a few seconds, in a minute, and it's really simple to implement. We'll go through animation controller, which is the essence of all of this, which allows us to control every transition that we're going to use and anything else related to that. We'll be going through size, fade, slide, and scale transitions, a page wrap builder, which we're going to do a custom transition from one view to another view, and obviously tweens, which we'll need to use for things like slides transitions that involve moving in positions on the screen, and also at the end we'll use a color tween, which will allow us to transfer to go from one color to fade into another color, and use offsets and a few other elements of Flutter to do these twins, and I'll just explain a bit later what the tween is. So I've got a bit of wall of text here, and what we're going to start doing is jump into our IDE, our text editor, in this case Android Studio. and start going through a few of the design elements that Gonçalo has shown us during his presentation, and we'll be live coding some of these animations across the board. So from our intro to our detail page to the home page, and let's jump into that. So I'm going to just shift here to our presentation. Give me a second, swapping now. All right, so you can see my codes, you can see the app. I was messing around here a little bit with the Gonçalo's code. So let's start with the basics. I'm going to do a full hot restart here application. So we go from where we are. Gonçalo will notice that I've actually changed the color back to we saw on Gonçalo's presentation. Obviously, all this has right now is a simple start button. It's just like a splash screen for our app. Once you tap on this, you see the main area, what is called the home page. You've got a bit of a greeting up here. You've got a search area, and obviously you've got also your details page where you can see the recipe. You have a few interactions here with a button. You have a favorite button. You have your title. You can go back. Obviously here, if you start searching for something and you press enter, obviously I was using here the actual physical keyboard, so I'm gonna just pop it up again, the normal one. If I start typing something, it just keeps being added here. So we're going to animate a series of these things. I'm just going to do a hot restart here so you can see what we're going to animate. So we'll be animating this this intro into the home page. We'll be animating moving from this view of the home page to the detail view. We're going to animate a few more elements inside here, and we're also going to animate the these chips that are being used here. So as you start writing, to make this a bit more seamless instead of just popping up and popping out. So let's start. So I'm going to start with some of the simplest, and that is the hero animations, as I mentioned in the presentation. So right now, once we tap on this image, we just jump directly into the recipe itself. So what I want to do is use a hero widget that is very simple to implement. So I'm just going to search here for where we're showing these images. We can see here we have our recipe grid, which is what we're seeing here. We have a recipe image, and we know that this will navigate to a detail, and that means we'll be opening then this page here, which also. So the hero widget is actually one of the simplest widgets to implement. All we have to do is surround because I want to show you a little bit of what it does. So hero class here, hero animation. It actually, we can read here, there's basically a widget that marks its child as being a candidate for hero animation. So which Flutter will actually look within your widget tree to find an element that can be used in comparison to where the navigation is going to land, to see if there are common elements that they can use for a hero animation. That's why it mentions that it's a candidate. So we'll actually do exactly that. We'll wrap around this recipe image with a new widget. I'm just going to call here our hero widget, but I need to tag it. So it actually has a property called tag. And here we'll just use our recipe, because it's an element that can be used to tag it and to identify that's going to be the two matching elements in the widget tree that we want to match. I'm going to save this and go into our detail page and do exactly the same on this side. So they need to match exactly, not necessarily the location, but the tags need to be the same so that Flutter can find where it is. So and the other one was just recipe. Here it's widget.recipe, because obviously we're here on a stateful widget, and because this is a recipe we're receiving on the first class, on the actual state class, we need to declare it as widget.recipe. So I'm going to save this now. What's going to happen is once we click here, we can see that we are getting the hero animation. It's literally just picking up that image, enhancing it, and pushing it into the next view during a transition. So it's nice, but we can see that we actually do already have some problems here. Starting by the fact that once we tap on the image, this bottom detail section here obviously doesn't show very well, because it gets blocked and then pops up. So this is where we're going to start to do some more interesting transitions. So let's go into this detail page. This is where we are right now. I'm going to scroll all the way down here to where our bottom detail widget is. Let me just give this a little bit more space so we can see a little bit better. So bottom detail widget is exactly what we have here. Currently, it's a stateless widget. Now, to do animations, we need to have a state because essentially it's going to be rendering. And if it's just a stateless widget, it doesn't expect any changes to happen. And because we're going to need an animation controller, as we were mentioning earlier, we're actually going to have to be declaring an animation controller that needs a series of properties that without a state, it won't work. First thing I'm going to do is actually going to use a helper here to convert the stateful widget. All this is doing is take the class we already had, for those of you who don't know, moving it over to become a stateful widget, and then creating the previous code we had and moving it to the state class down below. So right now, I'm going to start creating here our animation controller, and we're going to have some issues straight away, but we're going to tackle them. So animation controller, I'd expect to declare this as an animation controller, and we'll immediately see that it's warning us that we need something here, vsync. So what is vsync? Vsync and the animation controller, and I had here vsync should be here. Ticker provider. So vsync is as you'd expect, trying to sync the frames being rendered on the screen, and looking for changes at that time. And we'd have to read the whole documentation, but I can tell you straight away that what we'll need is to declare this mixin that we have here, a single ticker provider state mixin, which essentially is like we were talking about ticker. This means that it's in the state, it's going to be syncing everything that's happening on each frame passing, and this way we can run animations because it's going to make the changes on the screen that we're looking for. So let's swap back to our code. I'm going to do the same right here, and we can come here and we'll see that we have to tell our states class that it can use a single ticket. It's not that much. So anyway, I would have to declare this so that it could reference our actual class, but because this is a stateful class and we can't be referencing this here, we actually need to do this code inside our init state. So for those of you who are already familiar with Flutter, or you'll already be aware of this, we have to declare init state. So this is a method that's of our stateful class that we are overriding. And now I'm going to have to actually do the declaration of our, not declaration, the implementation, not the right word, but you understand what I mean, of our variable right here. So on top of this, but we have a few more things we can control here. Obviously, they're showing up here, but we need to add a duration. So we actually want to tell our animation how long it's going to run. So by default, I'm going to define here as milliseconds. I'm just going to say, to start with, 150 milliseconds. Now, what am I declaring this for? So I'm doing all of this because I want to be able to use it in a transition. And before I actually do that, it's very important to remember that you have to dispose of things like animation controllers. Otherwise, you can just be using up memory on your app that you don't need to. So all you need to do is override the dispose method and simply call the dispose here. This is key. Flutter will warn you if you're not doing this, but you should always do it. Otherwise, you can just might be just consuming memory that you don't need to. So I'm going to take all of this that we have, so all of our container that holds this bottom widget here, and I'm going to wrap it around with a transition. To start with, I'm going to use a fade transition, which obviously, as we can guess from the name, is going to change the opacity. All I need to do here is say that the opacity will be controlled by this animation controller we've done here. Now, if I try to run this now, nothing will happen, and that's because we actually haven't told the animation controller to do anything. We declared it, we said what it's equal to, but we actually need to say that when this have it move forward. So now let's see what happens. We're going to have a problem. First of all, it disappeared. So it doesn't seem like anything's going on. So let me change this to a longer period of time. We actually saw it fade in now. I'm going to put a whole second so you can actually see it happen a bit better on the frame rate of YouTube. So it's still not great. and it's pretty long. It's pretty annoying. So let's do two things. I'm going to do free transition here is not exactly the best option. So I'm actually gonna add another transition on top of this. And actually we're going to use here a slide transition. So the slide transition is based on movement, on offsets. So it's not scaling or changing the size of your actual widget. It's going to move it around on the screen back and forth, up and down on the X and Y axis. So we're going to do exactly that. Now we will notice is that this asks for a position, and it won't work. It won't simply work with our animation controller. Our animation controller is just moving back and forth the animation, but we're actually saying to the slide transition which X and Y positions we want it to move. So what we actually need to do is declare here a tween. A tween, as I'm going to swap here to our browser, we'll be able to see what a tween is. So a tween is a linear interpolation between a beginning and ending value. So it's essentially like a range, and we're telling it where it starts and where it ends, and it's moving across that range. So once we give this the slide transition this range and tell it to start, to go forward and to go backwards, it'll know how to move across this range. So we'll tell our offset of our widget that it's going to start off screen like +1, so to the right or to the bottom of our view, and then I'm going to reset it to 0, so it's going to move all the way up back to where we want it to. So let's go back to our code and do exactly that. So I'm going to say what kind of tween this is to start with. So it's going to be an offset tween because this is what we're going to declare. We can see here that it expects us to give a beginning and an end. So I'm going to give it offset. An initial offset, and this is X and Y. So I want it to start at -1, actually at 1, which means, and a 0. So this means that at 1, it's going to start after where our screen is being displayed, so a whole element offset, and then in terms of x-axis, so below our current view, and 0, it doesn't matter, it's going to stay on the y-axis exactly where it is. And we want it to end at offset, and we can actually do just offset 0 here, which is the same as doing just 0, 0. And obviously we still have some errors here, but that's because this position actually expects an animation. So we have to use this method called animate and use our animation controller to still control the same thing. So let's see if this actually is working. Yeah, but I've made a mistake because I've used the x-axis and actually want the y-axis. I'm going to lower this a little bit in terms of speed so we get it a bit faster. Oh, there we go. Something is happening. It's actually coming from the wrong place. Let's do a hot restart here. It was doing X and Y movement. We actually only want Y movement. Huh, that's interesting. It's doing a weird thing. Anyway, let's move on. So what's happening here? It's happening that once we press on the hero animation goes through, it's already running straight away. Our animation control is starting from immediately, which means that it's still becoming a blocking animation. Let me just open here my notes. And we actually want to change that. So we want it to run after the hero animation has gone through. And for that, we're actually going to use something else. We're going to use a timer. We're going to have to do an import here because we don't have it imported here, which is the async library. And I'm going to use that because I want to run this animation only once our hero animation finishes. This is probably the simplest way of doing this. I'm sure there is a more complex way of expecting the hero animation to finish and only running it then, but for the sake of this workshop, we're going to use this method. So here it expects us to give it a duration. I'm going to give it a duration of about, I'm going to say 150 milliseconds. It might be more. And here we're actually going to call, our animation forwards inside this. So that means that it will only run once this timer finishes. Let's go back. Let's see the difference. Well, now we can actually see it. I think 150 might be a little bit too low. Let's try 175, and here I want to do a bit faster, 150, 25. See what happens. Oh, so it's actually coming down now. Let's see if it's matching. It's more or less okay. I think it's taking a little bit too long. Sorry for fiddling too much, just being a little bit perfectionist. The animation is maybe a little bit too fast. Anyway, let's move on. So we have a bit of animation going on. It's a little bit better than it was. See, our fade and transition is happening as well. But now I want to add another animation here. So we've got a title up here, and I want to be able to move that title as well at the same time as I'm moving the bottom widget. So let's do exactly that. So we could do the same thing as we've done here on the bottom detail widget, where we were creating adding a single ticker provider state mixin. We were adding animation controller, but we actually don't need to do this because we want to run the animation at the same time. So instead of having to do redundant code, we're going to move all of this declaration here with a single ticker, our animation controller, and almost everything else. We're going to take this and we're going to move it all the way to our parent widget up here, which is already a stateful widget. So by doing this, we'll be able to use the same animation controller to control both animations that are in different widgets. So I'm actually going to roll back the changes that we've done down here, and I'm going to delete a bit of code. Don't be scared by this. I'll be deleting most of this code and swapping back this to a stateless widget. And now obviously we can see that we have an error here because we no longer have this animation controller variable here, and we also need to change this because this is no longer a stateful widget. Change these widget references because now the variable is directly inside here. So what do we need to do? What we need to do is, because this animation controller is now in our parent widget that is calling the bottom detail widget, we're actually going to declare that we expect to receive exactly that here. So I'm going to do exactly this. We're going to add an animation controller here. We're going to change this to animation controller, declare this. Also make the change here straight away. And we need to obviously declare here that we expect to receive this. I've got the required as well, this dot animation controller. Now, if we see where this is being declared, I'm just using a shortcut here. We can see that it's already giving us a warning because I set it as a required element. It's telling us that it's missing here. So let's do exactly that. So animation controller, and we've declared that up there already. Animation controller, we can see that it's up here, exactly with the same settings we had before, and it should still be working. So let's do exactly that. It's still working as intended. Now this means that we can. I don't like this delay. It's driving me nuts, but we'll fix it afterwards. So recipe name widget. So this is the widget up here that has the title, the stars, and the number of reviews. So this is also a stateless widget. I don't need to make it a stateful widget because we'll be using the animation controller that's from above. We'll just need to do the same thing we've done before, which is to add here the expectation of receiving. I'm gonna just copy this, of receiving the animation controller from the previous from the parent widget. Sorry, declare it here as well. Oof. Learn to spell. Okay, and that means now we can now use this same animation controller to do some animations on this side. We're actually going to do very similar animations, just on a different axis. So I'm actually going to copy at least this one here to make our lives a bit easier. And I'm going to do this exactly the same thing we've done before. I'm going to wrap this with the slide widget, slide transition. I'm going to put this here. Now the big difference is that now I actually want it to be -1 on the x-axis because I want it to come from the left and slide over to the center or to its current position. But I also, that's an error is going to show because we've just made some changes. Let's just go back and see what's going on here. Whoopsie daisy. See what did I mess up? What am I missing? So I've done an error. Oh, obviously I haven't declared here. I haven't, the same thing we've done above. We haven't passed our animation controller from the parent to the child widget. So let's check what's happening. So I actually have movement going on. The animation's happening. Once you tap on an image, we move, we get the hero animation, and we get that sliding. It's still This delay is not working. I need to change that delay because it's driving me nuts. So I think it's actually more closer to maybe 225. Let's see what happens. Yeah, that's a bit better. So I still want to add another transition here, like we did in the previous one, fade transition, as it's a little bit makes it a little bit more readable, and it's really easy to implement. We just add here, just add the opacity, and just pass our animation controller, and now we'll have some fade in as well. All right. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. More or less happy with that. So let's move to something else. Now we had this intro. If I do a hot restart, we can see that we have an intro here. We do have an issue sometimes with the emulator, as you'll see that kind of stops on the first time it runs some certain animations. But there is really no transition here. It just goes from one view to the other, just pops. So I want to change that. And to do that, we're actually going to go to a class that Gonçalo made here called navigation. And we can see that the navigate to home, which is being used on the intro page, I'm going to swap here to the intro page. We have a navigate to home method here. It's being used here, and all it's doing is pushing a replacement using a named route. So I'm not going to use a named route. I'm going to call these things directly. It's a lot simpler for us to use here. If I manage to, I don't remember what's the commenting shortcut, so I'm going to do it from hand. So we're going to use also obviously our navigator to move from one view to the other, and we're going to push a new route. But instead of using the push replacement, we're actually going to use something different. So I'm going to swap here to the browser so we can look at it. So we're going to use a page route builder. So it allows us to define a whole route from scratch, and we'll see that we'll be able to use the page builder and the transitions builder, so we can exactly define where it's going, what transition is happening, how long the transition lasts, and the whole animation. So let's do that now. So I'm swapping back here to our code, and I'm going to do exactly that. So page route transition, page route builder, sorry, and let's see what happens here. So page route builder, what does this expect? It needs at least a page builder. So let's add a page builder. This page builder expects a series of, oh, where are my shortcuts here? Here we go. It gives us a context, it gives us a basic animation and a secondary animation, which we won't be using. It's really not used much at all in Flutter. Let's ask that to the Flutter team, not me. And if we just do here our home, which is what we expect, and this actually, sorry, it's our home page, which is actually not here, so I'll have to pull its import from the file. And I know already that this expects to get a recipe repository, and so we're going to put it here. All right, let's see what happens now. I'm going to do a hot restart, and it should still work despite changing the push replacement named route navigation to a normal one. We still have things going on. That's all right. So this is cool for now. So what do we want to change? Well, we have a transitions builder, and that's what we want to use to do a custom transition. Now, as before, this gives us a context as well, animation. Sorry, we're missing a comma here. A main animation, a secondary animation, and it also gives us a child, which will be what's coming from the page builder. Now, we could just return child, and this would just work as it is right now. You'll notice that we now have a back button here, which is not usual because you'll be in an intro and you don't expect to go back to the intro. But for sake of us playing around with this, I'm going to keep it here. So there's nothing going on. It's just working fine. It's returning the same child. So I actually want to put some sort of animation here. So let's do a fade transition as we've done before. Sorry, different keyboard. This expects a child. Obviously, we're passing the child that had before. This might give us some issues, but we're going to handle them. And now we're not using an animation controller. We're getting our animation from our transition builder here from our page route builder. So we're going to use that. Let's put animation and let's see what happens now. I'm going to click back. We've got a fade in animation. So this is already looking a little bit better. But I actually don't want to use this. It's actually a bit slow. So I'm going to, because we have a transition duration property, I'm going to use that to say I want it to actually just last lasts 150 milliseconds instead. So yeah, it's a little bit faster. But we're going to get a little bit deeper into this because fade transition is too simple for us. We're actually going to use something else. Let's once again use the slide transition. I'm going to cheat as usual, as every programmer does, and copy paste our tween controls from somewhere here. Where was our, actually, it's from our detail page because I don't want to have to rewrite this. And let's go here. So obviously I'll have to change this from animation controller for animation. And we'll see this is actually not as simple as it seems. We're going to cause some issues here. Let's save this as it is and see what happens. It's first of all, it's not doing what I expected. I want our intro to move off, not for our homepage to come in. So this is to do with the fact that we are sending the child here. So you'd think that maybe we could do something like declare our intro page here and run it like this, and this is really not going to work well. So it's just, yeah, this is not good. So what we actually need to do is to use a stack so that we can keep the home page below it. We have the intro above it, and then the intro will move off and immediately show what our page builder is actually building, which is the home page. So let's do that. We're going to use a stack here. I use the column because it's the easiest, most similar to stack. And we're going to keep the intro page here, but what I'm going to do is put our child above it here. I believe this is the correct way. So let's see what happens now. It's still not working well. And that's because two things. Well, the main thing is that our begin and end are reversed. I actually wanted to start off from offset 0 and ends in the other position. So let's reverse it. And let's see what happens here. Now that's what I was looking for. So now when I tap on this, our intro moves away. Sorry if the animation is looking a bit janky. That's because of the emulator and YouTube compressing. But we actually have an animation going here a bit nicer. All right, so we've done some animations here between the hero. We've done some slide fade. Same thing over here with our intro. I think it's looking all right. Now, next step. We have here these, gonna use the keyboard so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just typing away something random, adding it here. I'm gonna do the same again. And it just pops up. Now I want to change this. I want this to be a little bit nicer, a bit more interactive. So I'm going to close off all of these pages that we had here. I'm going to go back to the home page because these are called chips. And we're going to look for these here. Chip search bar. I want to find the actual chips themselves. So they're called cook chips. Gonçalo called them cook chips, and that's what we're using. Now, I could try to animate them from the outside, but I actually don't need to. I'm going to animate them themselves because this way, whenever they're added, they just run the animation by themselves. So once again, we're going to change this into a stateful widget, and we're going to use, obviously, in the laziest way, I'm going to copy. Let's see, where do I have my, I shouldn't have closed it, a detail page, because I don't want to have to write all this code again. And I'm going to copy paste this, obviously. Oh, obviously I forgot to do proper dispose here. Let's do this now, because if we don't, it can be a problem. All right. And now I can actually copy what I wanted. Let's go back to our home page, look for our chips. Recipe grid, chip. All right, so here we are. So now, there we go. I've copied in all of this. I'm going to ignore this line because we won't need it here. Obviously, this is failing already because we've changed it from a stateless to a stateful widget, and we haven't done a hard restart, so it's messing up the state. So I'm just gonna, so we don't have an error showing on the screen, I'm just gonna redo this and hide the keyboard. Okay, you can see that animation the first time it runs is a bit weird, but okay, so we don't have an animation yet. I've just added an animation controller like we had before, and I'm actually going to do the animation. So we're going to use a different one. We're actually going to use now a size animation. and it's not the same as a scale. Sorry, I mean size transition. It's not the same as the scale. The scale will start from the dead center of the widget and expand outwards. Size will actually, you define an axis and say if you want it to grow horizontally or vertically, and by default it will be vertically. So let's check it out. So we actually have to here a size factor and animation controller. So now again, I'm gonna add here what we removed earlier. Add here the forward. Let's test out what happens when we do this. So I'm gonna add something here, and it's doing an animation. It's relatively quick, but it's adding vertically, which is not what we want. So we actually have a property here, which is axis, as I mentioned before, and the axis can be horizontal. So once I save, this is already going to change. I delete it, can add a few new ones, and we can see that it's much nicer animation. As you've seen before, I tend to always add a fade transition on top of these just because it makes it a bit less janky. And I'm going to do exactly the same here, just add the animation controller here. And now when we add it, it's a little bit softer. Now, we have an animation when we're adding, but when we click on it, there's actually no animation whatsoever. But we should be able to reverse this. So let's do that, because we actually do have a non-delete method being called here for the parent, where it's controlling the list of chips. So let's add the method, exactly the same thing, just makes sense. Sorry, I'm just not used to this keyboard. Okay, we don't need any parameters. What we're going to do is we'll be calling the method that comes from the parents here directly. I'm going to swap around and put our methods being called here. And now we're going to call our animation controller and do a reverse on it. This is not going to work, but I'm going to show you why. So if we do this, and I now add an item here, another one, click here, it just keeps disappearing. And obviously this is happening because we're removing the item at the same time we're trying to do reverse animation. So what we can do is this actually can be given a future, a then, as anyone who's used event-based like Node.js or anything like that promises, you know how this works. Essentially, you just can say that I want to wait for this animation, for this method to be run, and the whole animation to be run, and only then I want to delete what comes from it. So let's do this, and we'll actually can see an animation now. Now we're going to have a different problem. You saw that. So there's still a chip somewhere here, but because Flutter is having an issue understanding in our lists which animation is running at that time on that list, it can't identify them uniquely, and it's just giving us a problem. So to fix this, we need to, on our original cook chip on the main class, we need to add here on the super a key to uniquely identify our and I say unique, but we can actually can't use a unique key to do this, as you'll see. And here, final key. And now I'm actually going to just add here the annotation of required, because otherwise this won't work properly. So let's see where we're declaring this cook chip. Up here, I believe. No, here. And we can see here that we have a mention that we need a key. Now, I've tried doing this with a unique key. It's what most people would expect that would work, but it does not. It fails as well. So what I actually do is make a key from the value itself, and this is actually going to fix our problem. So I'm just going to go back here so we can restart our state. And if I add something here, another one, and I now start deleting them, oh, I actually have a problem here. Let's see what's going on. Let's do a full restart here, just to make sure before I start changing code. Add a chip, add another one. No, now it's working fine. Just needed to do a full restart of the state. And we can see now that if we do remove it, we get the animation, and it doesn't create that issue with hiding another chip. Okay, so we're running on time. We still have a little bit of time. I'm going to do one last animation. I'm sure people will have maybe some questions regarding this. I'm just going to look at here a little bit more. So we're doing a forward as soon as the chip comes in or in its state. Obviously doing the dispose, we've got a fade and a size transition happening here, and then we have on deleted. Instead of using the original on delete that just removes our chip from the list of chips, we're actually going to run a reverse animation so we can see the full slide and fade back, and then the on deleted only runs after that's done and removes it from the list, and then it can adjust the rest of the widgets around it. So there's one last animation I want to do, actually multiple animations, which I find the most fun to do. And this one is on the detail page. So on our detail page, we have all these animations running, the hero animation, this one coming up here, the bottom detail, but this is a native one from Flutter, but we have this favorite button here that Gonçalo put here for us, but it actually does nothing. Not only does it do nothing, there's no animation, there's no reaction whatsoever. So I want to animate that, and we're going to add a bit more complexity here. So let's look for this. Where is this being used? I know it's using an icon that's called favorite. So here it is. So I'm gonna take this. I can see that the icon is just the thing inside, but then we have this container with a box decoration with a radius. So this radius is what's making this box with the rounded corners. So that means that I actually need all of this. So I'm gonna take all of this, including our aspect ratio. I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna create a new widget down here. So I'm gonna create a stateful widget because we're gonna be using animations. I'm gonna call it favorites button. And for the British watchers, yes, I'm doing favorite without a U. And I'm going to copy the code down here. So we're now outputting all this button, all this favorite icon and interaction down with this widget here. So I'm going to replace all of this with our new widget, favorite button. I've saved it, it's still working, we're good. Now we're going to do animations here. I want to do something we haven't done yet, which is use a color tween. I want to change the color of the heart to red once we tap on it. I know it's a bit romantic, but that's what we're doing. So to do that, we're going to I'm going to once again copy some code from what we've done before. I'm not going to use the same animation controller we have up here because this is a completely separate animation. And I'm just going to once again copy this so I don't have to rewrite it, because I am lazy like every software developer, and copy paste it here. I will remove this once again because we're going to control this animation differently. We're actually going to transform this into a button. So we have an animation controller, and first of all, I'm going to wrap all of this with a new widget that's a gesture detector, so we can actually say that when we press untap, we want something to happen, and that something is going to be to move our animation controller forward. We're obviously going to change this later, but just for the sake of showing us now, forward. Obviously nothing's happening yet. So this is where things get a bit more complicated. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. Let's start with the color tween. So we have an animation controller, but we're actually going to do an animation itself. And the first one, we're going to call it heart animation. Well, heart animation. And the second one called container animations. Oops, container animation. And now we're going to declare these. So both of these will be more or less the same. The heart animation is going to be a color tween. Color tween, as we saw earlier, tweens are interpolations that we're going to be running through a range. A color tween already expects us to give it colors to run through, so it actually makes our life very easy. That means that we can just say, I want you to start as the color black, and I want you to end as the color red. And then obviously, as we saw before with the tweens, we have to actually say to animate with the animation controller. Now, where the tricky part comes here, we're changing colors, and it's not a fade transition or any of the other transitions we've used. We're actually going to be telling this icon, which you can give it a color. So I could come here and just say color, and let's say colors.red. And if I save that, it changes to red. But what we're actually going to do, we want to use our heart animation and use its current value at a given time to change the color of this. But we're actually not running anything through. Obviously, we're getting an error here immediately. And that's because to do this properly, we have to come here and add a listener to this animation. So when the animation controller is running, the tween runs from black to red, but we actually not telling this isn't exactly telling the screen to repaint this widget. We actually have to use a set state, as most of you might be familiar with, which is what we usually use to tell Flutter that we want to rerun a piece of code and we want to rebuild the piece of code visually. So let's just go back here, see if I haven't made any. Oh, did I crash this? I think I crashed it. That's a new one. Cool. I've actually crashed the app. So let's do a full restart here. It's been a while since I've managed to crash the emulator on iOS. Let's give it a second. Sorry, people. Gonna have to do a full build. Should take a minute or two. So while this is happening, I'm actually going to copy paste this while we're waiting for the builds to happen, so we don't just waste time. And I'm gonna now do this container animation. So the container animation, I'm still gonna use colors, but by default, the color animation, the background was white. So I'm gonna start with white, and then I want to change it to black. Everything else stays the same. This is taking a minute. We'll still add 1/3 animation. Come on, Xcode, you can do it. Well, sorry about this, guys. Actually hasn't crashed like this before, but that's what happens when you live stream. Let's meanwhile add the color here as well. So because usually container receives the color property directly, but because we are using a box decoration, we actually have to define it inside here, and we're going to do the same thing, dot value. Okay, let's see if this doesn't crash again. We're inside here. It works. That's cool. So we actually have our heart animation and our container animation with color tweens. We have our add listener to make sure that our set state is called every time it ticks. So as the frame rate is running, and it's changing from black to red and white to black. Now, obviously, this isn't very interactive because you can only click it once. So we're actually going to do some codes to make this work the other way around. So I'm tapping here. It goes one way. So this doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we're going to do is declare here a boolean and say that I'm just going to call it favorite because I can. I'm going to initiate it as false, so it actually starts in the normal state where we've seen it. And I'm going to reuse it here to say that whenever I want to check, I'm going to use here a ternary to do a check. If favorite is true, then we will move our animation forward. If it's not, then we're going to move our animation, sorry, we're going to move our animation in reverse. Okay, still need to do this. And now what we're going to do is, because I wanted to keep clicking and I want it to change from true to false, so I can run the animations back and forth. I'm going to say that favorite is going to be equal to itself, the reverse of itself. That's for those who don't know, that's what the exclamation mark does before the variable. It's going to swap the value. In the case of a boolean, it's going to be true to false. So let's try it out. Let's get back in. So if I tap it once, it works. If I tap it again, it goes back. So we've got an animation running. This already looks cool, but I still want to do one last thing because we have a few minutes for it before the questions. And that's, on top of all of this, I'm going to add a scale transition because I can. So on our icon, I'm going to add a new widget here, a scale transition. And this is going to get a bit tricky because, first of all, I'm going to use another animation controller. So for the first time, we won't be using a single ticker provider. We're actually going to use just normal ticker provider. And that's because single ticker provider is obviously to save memory and to save resources. To tell your state widget that so your state class that you're only going to be running one animation. In this case, we actually want to run two animations. So the second animation is going to be our heart scale controller here, which I need to declare once again, as we did this one. And instead of this, I'm going to call it here the heart scale controller. I'm going to give it a slightly shorter duration. This is obviously already failing miserably because we're missing some codes. Here we have size. Whoops. Let's see what's the name of it. Scale. So I was looking for size. Scale, heart scale controller. So obviously it just is going to fail because I haven't controlled. Oh, did this crash again? Yes, it did. Now that's lovely. Another rebuild. We'll just keep coding while this rebuilds. So what we're going doing here is what I want to happen is I want to tap on the button and I first want the heart to expand and then contract back to its original value. But at the same time this is happening, I want the color to change as it was before, but I actually want the color to change once the heart reaches its peak size, and then as soon as it's returning back to normal size, that's when the color changes. So this is a bit more complex, and to do this, we actually have to make some changes to the animation controller that we're doing up here on the heart scale controller. So what I'm going to do is add a few more properties here. So I want the default value of this to actually be 1. So I want our heart to be at its full size and not start at 0, because when you're using the animation controller, it's going to start at the lowest value. As we can see here, I know this font is quite small, but you have a lower and upper bound, and the lower bound is usually 0. The upper bound starts by default at 1. That means that it will go always from 0 to 1, and when you reverse it, it goes to 1 to 0. But because I want our hearts to be fully shown when it starts, I'm going to start it at 1.0. But then I'm going to say that I want our upper bonds to be 175, and our lower bonds, I'm going to fully declare it at 1. This will allow us to actually, when we run the animation, for it to already exist in the size that it is, expand into a little bit bigger, and then go back. So we need to actually run this animation. So we're going to take our heart scale controller, which is being used on our scale transition, and I'm going to run it up here as well. Now, because we don't have much time, I'm going to run it further ahead. So instead of running, I could be running these two at the same time. But because I want, as I explained, the color animation to only happen after the heart expands and then contracts, I'm actually going to wrap all of this around. So I'm going to do here a forward, and then use the then with the future that we used earlier. Change this to a full block of code. We're going to move this here inside. So that means that first it will run the heart scale. It will expand the heart. Only when the heart is fully expanded, it's going to run the color animations, and then which will depend on obviously if the favorite has been clicked or not. And then we have another then, and this is where I actually want to reverse the animation and do a full reverse here. So let's hope the emulator doesn't crash again. Start. Let's go here. There we go. This is what I wanted to happen. And it's working in reverse obviously as well. So once I tap on the button, it fully expands. I'm going to just make it a little bit slower so we can actually see it happen a little bit better. Let's go back here. Just want to make sure it restarts the state. So it's happening only when it's fully expanded does it change the color, and back again. So this is it. This is the last animation. I think more or less right on time after a couple of crashes from the emulator or simulator in this case of iOS. So we've done a few animations here. We've got our intro that does a slides out of the way so we can see our homepage. We've got our chips here that once you start typing and tap enter, they fade and slide in. Once you delete them, they do the same. We've got a hero animation that we go from our image in the grids to forwards to our detail page. And as you can see, obviously we also get our bottom details coming up, our animation coming in from the left on our title, and we've got a cute little animation here with the hearts showing when you want to favorite a new thing. And that's about it. So I guess we'll now pass to the Q&A part. I'm not sure if we'll be able to hear Gonçalo or not, but please shoot away some of these questions. I'm gonna move here section to. Oh, I can hear Gonçalo.
Hello, João. I think that if you stay in the same section, in the same scene, I think people will hear me.
Okay, let's. Okay, I'll keep it on present, and let's see. Hopefully, people will reply if you can, if they can hear you or not.
Yeah, I heard myself. I'm watching the stream.
Okay, cool.
So um, I want to thank you for taking your time to do this live coding session. And I see that we have some questions on the chat. So Lucas Rosinelli wants to say, João, you declare the animation inside detail widgets. Let's say that I want the same animation applied on a few widgets, recipe detail, user details, and so on.
Yeah.
Is there a way to create a centralized component, builder or factory, for example, which can handle these animations templates?
I'm not sure what he means, but the animation templates is because
I think
I hope.
it's using the same animation
Yeah.
and different components instead of
Well,
using the same widget.
you can do what I showed in the code of basically what we were doing. If I understood the question correctly, the same thing we're doing here on the detail page is exactly that. We're declaring, with the exception of the heart animation, we're declaring a single ticker provider state mix in here, one animation controller, and then we're actually sending this animation controller to all the widgets down below, which are actually our stateless widgets or the less complex widgets. They do have animations because they're being controlled by an animation controller on its parent, then they don't need to be stateful animations. So we're sending it here and we're sending it down here as well. I'm not sure if he was asking something slightly different from this in terms of animation template. I'm not sure if this is what he means or if he was looking for something slightly different because
He
it's
said exactly use the same animation in different widgets.
okay.
So
Okay, so yeah, that's fine. I mean, you could essentially have even a normal ticker here instead of a single ticker provider, and have multiple animation controllers to use in multiple animations across all of your view. Let's say of your from all the children of your parents widgets, and you have multiple ones that actually have, let's say, you had 5 different animations running, but you want 3 of them to be controlled by one controller and 2 of them being controlled by another controller. You can have that controller also on the parent. Just pass the correct controllers to each child widget, and once you do that, then whatever changes you do to the animation controller on the parent is going to control these child widgets individually, and they'll still run at the same time. Just the one pair, the 2, and the other 3 together from the same controller will be running exactly at the same time as through the duration and every property you defined on the animation controller.
awesome. I think we have two more
Rafael.
questions. The first one is from Khaled. Khaled wants to say how to use the same animation controller to animate list of widgets, not in the same time, but when each one animation finishes. As I normally can make a list of animation controllers and link them with the list of widgets. So I
If
think that it's chaining animations.
Yeah, I believe if I understood the question correctly, this is what we were doing right here on the last on the heart. We were doing something very similar to what he's asking. Let me just find the favorite here. Yeah, so actually doing something very similar to what he's asking. As right here, we can see that I'm running the hard skill controller first. I'm moving this animation forward up to the maximum upper bound, which we defined as 175. So it's 75% bigger than it would usually be of the default icon size. Only then am I deciding if favorite is true or false. Am I running the animation controller of the color tweens forward? And once this is done, then on the next part of the chain, I'm doing the reverse, so it goes back to the size, even though the color has changed. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but that's the understanding. Because essentially, as Gonçalo was saying, you're just chaining events as you would do in other languages that are event based and have promises or anything like that. Um, Obviously, because you're in full control of animations running forward or in reverse, and you can chain them like this, then you can basically do anything you want. You want it to be on an n items of list. So you're talking about having animated controllers, a list of animated controllers. Well, if you're trying to do something dynamically, it's still going to be difficult. I'm sure you could do that. I have to look into it more deeply and play around with it. If you want to do something dynamic, as in it just the list count might be changed. Yeah, you would have to look into this. I mean, I can help you if you show up on a Discord. I can I can help you out and see what you're trying to do, because without looking at code is a bit difficult. But I get the feeling that you have a list of animated controllers and you want to go iterate through them dynamically and run animations at a certain given time without having to hard code which animation controller you're running. I'm sure that's possible. I've never tried it. I'm not sure how much Flutter handles it if it keeps running on a 60 FPS while you do that, but we can try it out. If you pop up on Discord and show me your code, we can go through it and see what can be done.
And finally, Rafael Nunes is curious to do you know why the unique key trick didn't work, but why the key with the value worked?
Yes, I'm not 100% sure why. I'll be honest with you. I did play around with it quite a bit because it made sense to me that it should work, and it actually doesn't make a lot of sense to me why using key value works, because I tried using the same value, so the same string. But I think it's related to the fact, and Gonçalo can help me here, that the value I'm passing there is actually the recipe, so it's an object and not just a string. And to my understanding, I think actually, although key is supposed to be a string, I think Flutter is just converting, or Dart is just converting that object into a string, and this way it's actually different every time because the objects are never going to be the same. They always have a different hash value. I haven't figured out why the unique key doesn't work. I assumed it would. I can only guess it may have to do something with how it generates those unique keys every time things are rendered, and maybe it's just not exactly rendering the same unique key every time. While when you generate a key from the value and it's always the same value, then that's actually unique key will be the same one every time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that in this case, it's just a matter of trying to go deep inside the unique key class, deep
Yeah.
inside the key class, trying to figure out why it worked and why it didn't work.
Oh, I only saw your message now. Okay, so let's see. We have do we have any more questions?
I have two
Oh,
questions
you
for
have a
you.
question. Damn it.
Yeah. So the first question is you're a programmer, so you start doing animations in your code. When do you say that enough is enough and you don't do any more animations? Because, well, if you do animations on everything, then we are back to the old web with all the wild animations that we
Yeah.
saw on Android Fire websites.
I think, in my opinion, is that animations need to serve some sort of purpose. The ones that I was doing here during our app, like in the detail page, there's quite a few animations. Obviously, the purpose here starts with you just want this is an app that it's not a data app. Yes, it has data. You supposedly have to have, we have an image of the recipe. Eventually that would be, this would have a scroll view where you could read the or list view where you could read the recipe details and whatnot. But essentially, because we're working on a very visual application here, then the animation is I would consider not too complex as to have it serves the purpose of smoothing the user experience, so it's not just popping up out of nowhere. Obviously, I would probably not slow down as much as I've done here. I would have made these animations a bit faster, because obviously when you're running on an actual phone, these animations will run a lot smoother than they're currently running on the simulator. But my idea, and obviously this one's really slow right now, my idea is just to convene to the user a better experience without going a bit too far. If you're slowing down things for more than 100 milliseconds or maybe 200 milliseconds, then it's already slowing down the user experience, and that's just going to become less usable, and you being counterproductive, I think. So if it smooths the experience, if it makes the experience better, obviously this is very subjective. It requires usually for you to have some experience, or working with someone who's a bit more design savvy, or in this case more UX UI savvy, to help you out. It's a good question, but I think it requires a bit of experience to do it properly. And I'm not saying the ones I've done are proper ones, or just they are for the sake of demonstrating the animations.
Awesome. Well, thank you, João. I don't think there are any more questions in the chat now. Let me just check on our Discord server. I don't think so. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining in the stream. Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
Gonçalo.
João, for your time. Next week, we'll have two more talks. It will be with Agile about asynchronous operations and with Rafael about Firebase. So be sure to join in next week, and I'll provide in the next few days. I'll provide in the description the slides and the codes for each of the talks. Thank you, and see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gonçalo. Bye.